The story of Captain Marvel, or as most know the character today, Shazam, is a long, complicated, and convoluted tale. I was one of the many few children growing up who even knew who Captain Marvel was. It's one that even a deep fan like myself had to do some research to get all the little tidbits of things that I even didn't know about to be a part of this documentary. One would think a superhero that has been around as long as Superman, literally by just a few months, would be more well known. But in this case, the fact he has been around this long and the many iterations and complications during the past 81 years has added to the confusion. To keep this as organized as possible and to not confuse you, we will categorize this into three main lines or branches and the subcategories that fall under each. The three main branches of this tree are as follows. The original Captain Marvel Shazam line, first created in 1939, which were mainly published by Fawcett and DC Comics. The Marvel Man/Miracle Man line, starting in 1954, done by multiple publishers, and the Captain Marvel line, starting in 1967, published by Marvel Comics. While this is primarily a documentary on the original Captain Marvel Shazam character, I will touch on the other lines as well to give a more in-depth history that came from this quagmire. To begin, we will start with the original Captain Marvel created by Fawcett Comics back in 1939 with his first official appearance in Whiz Comics #2 in February 1940. Prior to this, the only real comic superhero as we know them was Superman in Action Comics #1 in June 1938. After the initial success of Superman for what was then National Comics, the precursor for DC, Fawcett Publication tasked staff writer Bill Parker to create several superheroes in 1939. He came up with 6, each with a special power granted by a mythological figure. Executive director Ralph Daig decided to combine the team into one hero, who at the time was initially named Captain Thunder for a book called Flash Comics. Thus was born the powers and mythos that became Captain Marvel. A young orphan boy, Billy Batson, was granted the powers of 6 immortal elders, Solomon, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, Achilles, and Mercury, when he spoke the magic word Shazam, which incidentally is an acronym of the first letters of the names of the mythological figures. This, like Superman, gave him super strength, speed, agility, and other abilities, one being flight, which at the time Superman was still unable to do. He only leapt tall buildings in a single bound. They ran a low-print ashcan in 1939 as Captain Thunder under the title Flash Comics. Shortly after, they found out Flash Comics was already trademarked, so they went with Whiz Comics, which published in late 1939, but the cover dated February 1940. Penciled by the great C.C. Beck, and Captain Marvel was born. In the same issue, his first arch-villain was also introduced, Dr. Savannah. What is not really known by most is that Captain Marvel outsold most comics throughout the Golden Age, including Superman. In 1944 alone, Captain Marvel Adventures sold 14 million copies and was at one point being published bi-weekly, circulating up to 1.3 million copies an issue. By that time, the spin-off characters of Captain Marvel Jr. and Mary Marvel were now a part of the family, as well as the villain Black Adam. Captain Marvel was so popular, he holds the honor of being the very first superhero ever to be adapted into a live-action movie, with the black and white adventures of Captain Marvel in 1941, a full 7 years before Superman hit the silver screen in 1948. The success of Captain Marvel did not go unnoticed. Thus began the first set of litigations that would span most of the 20th century of the name and character of Captain Marvel. National Comics, which later became DC, sued Fawcett for copyright infringement in 1941, alleging Captain Marvel was based on Superman. After 7 years of litigation, it finally went to trial in 1948. Although the presiding judge decided that Captain Marvel was an infringement, DC was found to be negligent in copyrighting several of their Superman daily newspaper strips, and it was decided that National had abandoned the Superman copyright. As a result, the initial verdict was delivered in 1951, and went in Fawcett's favor. In 1952, National appealed, and the appeal judge declared the Superman copyright was in fact valid. However, he did not find the Captain Marvel character itself was an infringement, but rather that specific stories and/or superfeeds could be infringements, which would have to be determined in a retrial. Instead of going to court, Fawcett decided to settle with National and pay them $400,000 in damages. By this time, comic sales across the board in the U.S. were declining, and Fawcett finally gave up the fight in 1953 and shut down productions of Captain Marvel. Whiz Comics ended with issue 155 in June 1953. Captain Marvel Adventures was canceled with issue 150 in November of the same year. and finally in 1954, the Marvel family had ended its run with issue 89. An era had ended. In order to try to keep this also in chronological order, we'll now shift our attention to the second branch of this tree, which is the offshoot branch of Marvel Man and Miracle Man. So to stay in this chronological order, we will talk about the years of 1954 to 1963. In the 50s, a small British publisher called L. Miller & Sons printed reprints of American comics, which included Captain Marvel. With the end of the lawsuit in 1953, they no longer had one of the most popular titles to print. To keep their small business afloat, they decided to make a thinly disguised version of Captain Marvel. To do this, they hired writer Mick Anglo, who created Marvel Man. He replaced the magic word of Shazam to Kimoda, which was atomic spelled backwards. This character, as well as other copies of the rest of the Marvel family, took over starting with issue 25. This new hero, not a part of the Captain Marvel universe, did become a part of the mythos behind the overall mythos of what Captain Marvel started. It ran annually from 1954 to 1963. Mick Anglo, who was somewhat disgruntled with L. Miller, left in 1960 and recycled some of his Marvel Man stories as Captain Miracle, which he published under his own imprint, Anglo Comics, but this shortly folded in 1961. However, the story of Marvel Man and Miracle Man does not end here and will return later in the century. The name Captain Marvel, however, did not die with the end of Fawcett or its copy, Marvel Man. There were new players in the comic world. A young Stan Lee had joined Marvel Comics, a merging of two other small publishers, Timely Comics and Atlas Comics, in 1961. The name Captain Marvel had not been used for over 15 years. Stan Lee and Marvel Comics decided to start a new title using the name, this time with an alien of the Kree race with cosmic powers named Mar-Vell. They were pretty smart with how they did it to avoid any copyright entanglement with what remained of the Fawcett estate by making the character different, but the name was free to use. So in October 1967, Marvel filed for a trademark for the name Captain Marvel and now owned it, but had no right to the original character of Captain Marvel, who still resided within the Fawcett estate. To make matters more confusing, in 1969, another publisher, Bill Black, tried to revive the original Captain Marvel for his fanzine Paragon Golden Age Greats. However, after some advice from a lawyer friend, he chose not to risk legal trouble with Fawcett and stopped the entire print run and saved 2 copies for himself. He later rewrote the story using a new created character, Captain Paragon. Obviously, the Marvel version of Captain Marvel has gone through a lot of changes up to the current iteration we now see in the cinematic universe, but we will return to this later. Heading into the 70s takes us back to the original Shazam Captain Marvel branch. In 1972, DC obtained the rights to Fawcett's old character using Captain Marvel. DC even licensed a TV show titled Shazam in 1974 that ran until 1976 as part of CBS's Saturday morning lineup. However, at the time it was a limited license agreement and they only used them sparingly, but since Marvel trademarked the name Captain Marvel, it could not be titled thus. So instead, DC chose to title it Shazam with the subtitle The Original Captain Marvel on the comic books, and inside the book he was still named Captain Marvel. Considering DC's purposely antagonistic use of the original Captain Marvel as a subtitle, Marvel filed a cease and desist order only after 14 issues, which DC then changed the name to Shazam, the world's mightiest mortal. Marvel, on the other hand, did not have any much success with any of their Captain Marvel books, but continued to reboot it every few years and new versions of it just to retain the trademark. Marvel's original Captain Mar-Vell eventually died in the 1982 death of Captain Marvel after it was rebooted many times with different people bearing the mantle. It was in 1977 with what would become the modern Captain Marvel would be created, Carol Danvers, who at the time was known as Miss Marvel. The grudge match between DC and Marvel was real. Once comics moved into the 80s, the third branch of the mythos, the Marvel Man Miracle side, piqued the interest of the new and upcoming artists and writers during that era. Des Skin, a former editor of Marvel UK, launched his own imprint, Warrior. Being a new label, he opted to revive some old characters not being used, one of them being Marvel Man. He recruited a young Alan Moore of Watchmen fame to write the reboot, which featured a darker version of the character, which was featured in the first issue of Warrior. Marvel Man ran from 1982 to 84, which was used until issue 21. The official reason given for its cancellation was that Marvel Comics objected to the use of the word Marvel in the title. However, the actual reason was a bitter financial dispute between Skin and Moore. After this, Skin sold the license and would eventually end up in the hands of Eclipse Comics. Eclipse began reprinting the series but relettered it as Miracle Man to avoid possible problems with Marvel Comics. After issue 6, they began publishing new stories written by Moore. Eclipse split the rights, with the 1/3 going to whoever the current writer was. At the time it was Moore, who wrote the series until issue 16. In 1988 and 89, another now well-known writer, Neil Gaiman, picked up the mantle. Miracle Man was featured in a miniseries called Total Eclipse by Gaiman in issue 4. He picked up the series again on issue 17 in 1990. 3 volumes were planned, titled Golden Age, The Silver Age, and The Dark Age. Golden Age was released, but only 2 issues of Silver Age ever saw the light of day due to Eclipse filing for bankruptcy in 1994, ceasing publication with issue 24. There's more to the story of Miracle Man, which I will cover in a moment, for there are other things going on at DC during this time. During this time period in the early 90s, DC was now becoming more interested in using the original Shazam, Captain Marvel. By 1991, DC had purchased all the rights directly. No longer having a licensing agreement, he was used more aggressively, but they could not market him under his actual name of Captain Marvel. When he was being used sparingly in the 80s, he was reimagined in his post-crisis appearance in the 1986 miniseries Legends, bringing Captain Marvel, Black Adam, Dr. Savannah, and other characters into the new DC continuity. With this version, Captain Marvel retained his personality of Billy Batson while he was the hero. Previous in all the Fawcett versions, they were portrayed as 2 separate personalities. There were many attempts to relaunch him during the decade, but most were not very successful. In 1991, however, famed artist and writer Jerry Ordway was tapped to reboot Captain Marvel with a graphic novel entitled Power of Shazam, which released in 1994 to critical acclaim. Ordway both penciled and wrote the novel, which led to an ongoing Power of Shazam series that ran from 95 to 99. He also appeared in the acclaimed 1996 Kingdom Come series, where he played a major role and is loved by many readers to this day. It was around the end of the 90s where we have to pick back up with the Miracle Man branch, because we once again see the litigation plaguing this whole mythos that is Captain Marvel. In 1996, Todd McFarlane of Spawn fame purchased Eclipse's assets after it went bankrupt, including Miracle Man for a total of $25,000. Per Eclipse's previous agreements with its writers, Neil Gaiman claimed he held co-ownership rights to Miracle Man, and in 2001 McFarlane stated he owned them outright and proceeded to make plans to use the character regardless. He introduced Miracle Man's alter ego Mike Moran in Hellspawn 6 with the intention of returning to hero in issue 13. In the long-awaited Image 10th anniversary book, Miracle Man was changed to a new character known as the Man of Miracles, who shapeshifted to look like Miracle Man. Gaiman at this time formed a company called Marvels and Miracles LLC, a company whose goal was to clear the ownership rights of Miracle Man. In 2002, Gaiman sued McFarlane over the unauthorized use of the IP. According to Gaiman, the evidence presented in the course of the lawsuit revealed that the rights for Miracle Man were not included in McFarlane's purchase of Eclipse Comics assets. Gaiman went on to write the series in 1602 for Marvel and use all the profits for the legal fund, and went so far to put in a dedication of the collector's edition of 1602 to Todd for making it necessary. Eventually, it emerged in 2009 that Mick Anglo, who first created the character, had retained the rights to Marvel Man from the beginning, meaning all the subsequent purchases by Eclipse and later McFarlane were illegitimate. Shortly after, it was announced at the 2009 San Diego Comic-Con that Marvel bought the rights to Marvel Man from Mick Anglo. Since then, Marvel released an ongoing Marvel Man series in 2010. As for Miracle Man, Marvel announced in 2013 that they had solidified their rights to the character and that Gaiman would finish the story he started 25 years earlier, with the first issue releasing in 2014. Miracle Man and Marvel Man now have a permanent home with Marvel Comics. As for Shazam, in the 2000s he got a few makeovers and appearances during events like Final Crisis, but was given a bold new approach in 2011's New 52. Here we see that the powers of Shazam is not only Billy Batson's, but is also spread across a family of 6 foster kids. His name is now permanently Shazam, with no mention of Captain Marvel, to the dismay of many. DC has given up that fight and has moved on. This new version of Captain Marvel was put on display as a live-action movie in the 2019 DC film Shazam that was a surprise and fun family success despite its small box office returns. Plans are in the works for a Black Adam movie starring Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, and reports are saying members for the Golden Age team, the JSA, will be making appearances, which is only fitting to give this Golden Age icon, other characters from that era, a new lease on life. Finally, for Marvel's iteration of the namesake, In its efforts to keep the trademark, Marvel has put many different characters under the name of Captain Marvel, rebooting the title every few years. It wasn't until 2012 that Carol Danvers traded her old roles as Ms. Marvel and Binary to assume the mantle of the only Captain Marvel in comics. Her books have not done so well, and as it was back when the Creed Marvel was around, it is constantly canceled and rebooted just to keep the trademark. However, she did get a new lease on life on the silver screen as the mid-movie between the MCU blockbusters of Infinity War and Endgame, and looks to be an important figure in the future of the MCU phases and movies. I hope you enjoyed this little documentary on a hero that I personally have always liked, and while there are new people liking Shazam, I still call him Captain Marvel, and I always will, but as while there's new people liking him because of the movie that came out, I don't think a lot of people know this history, and especially not just his, but all the litigation, all the lawsuits and the fights between all these different companies and people throughout the years that surrounded this one character, and all the branches it's taken and new forms it's taken along the way as well. I find it interesting, and I did do this video because a subscriber of mine, Trav, asked in the comments of my Black Adam video to, hey, why don't you do a video about all this stuff with Captain Marvel and all the other things. So I decided to do this. I do listen to you guys, and you know what? And please put some stuff in the comments. Let me know if there's things you'd like to hear or would like to hear me go over. I enjoy doing this kind of stuff, and I do want to give content that you guys do enjoy. I do want to remind everyone that I am also an author. My fantasy novel, Souls of Magic Dawn, is available on Amazon in hardcover, paperback, and ebook formats. Please, if you'd like to help support this channel and independent authors, give it a look and pick yourself up a copy if you like. Also, the Grey Order, we are running a charity drive. The Grey Order merch store is open at greyistheway.com. We have some cool Grey Order merch up there, and 100% of the profits are going to the CDP COVID-19 Response Fund, all the charity to help people dealing with this current pandemic crisis that's going across our country and the world at the moment. So please, if you'd like to help some people out, and you can, check it out at greyistheway.com. If you'd like to check out the video I did yesterday about Black Adam and the JSA being possibly in a movie, please click on the card above, and also please remember to like and subscribe while you are here. Thank you again, and so say we all.